Chicago O'Hare International Airport buzzed with excitement. Travelers hurried through the wide halls, suitcases rolling behind them. The loudspeaker called out flight numbers, announcing boarding for destinations all over the world. At Gate 12A, people were lining up for Flight 725 to Tokyo, Japan. Among the crowd was Oliver Bennett, a man who looked like he belonged in first class. Oliver wore a sleek suit and shiny black shoes. His watch gleamed, catching the light every time he moved his hand. His social media was full of pictures of him sitting courtside at basketball games, shaking hands with big names, and smiling next to luxury cars. He loved showing off his success. In his latest post, he wrote, "Just signed a $500 million deal. This is how legends are made." His followers ate it up, liking and commenting on every word. "Mr. Bennett, welcome aboard," said the flight attendant, her smile warm but practiced. She had seen many men like Oliver, all eager to make themselves seem more important than they were. Oliver nodded, barely acknowledging her, and walked confidently into the first-class cabin. He looked around at the spacious seats that could turn into beds. Each seat had its own screen, a plush blanket, and a little table. Oliver spotted his seat, 1A, and smiled. Perfect, he thought. He draped his expensive coat over the seat and settled in. The seat next to him, 1B, was still empty. Good, he thought again. I could use some peace and quiet. The boarding process continued. Passengers moved through the aisles, putting their bags in the overhead compartments. A few minutes later, a man appeared and stopped beside seat 1B. He didn't look like he belonged in first class. He wore a plain gray hoodie, jeans that were a little baggy, and sneakers that had seen better days. A basketball cap shaded most of his face. The man nodded politely at Oliver as he slid into the seat. "Evening," he said casually. "Yeah, sure," Oliver muttered without looking up. He was already typing on his laptop, writing another tweet about his amazing career. He didn't care about the man next to him. To Oliver, this guy was probably just someone lucky enough to afford a seat in first class. The man opened a bottle of water and took a sip. Soon after, a flight attendant came by offering champagne to the passengers. Oliver accepted a glass right away. The man, however, declined. "Water? Really?" Oliver whispered to himself, but loud enough for the man to hear. "Might as well be in coach." The man didn't say anything. He just smiled faintly, as if he was used to hearing comments like that. Oliver smirked to himself and went back to his laptop. This guy must not know what first class is really about, he thought. The plane took off, its engines roaring as it climbed higher into the sky. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and Oliver stretched his legs out. He glanced at the man next to him, who was calmly scrolling through his phone. Something about the man seemed familiar, but Oliver couldn't place it. Must be a nobody, he thought, dismissing the feeling. After a few minutes, Oliver decided to start a conversation. "So, what do you do?" he asked, leaning slightly toward the man. "Sports," the man said simply, not looking up from his phone. Oliver smiled, sensing an opportunity to brag. "Oh, me too. I run a sports management firm. We handle some of the biggest names in basketball. I bet we've got some interesting stories to share." The man nodded politely, but didn't say much. He put his phone away and pulled out a book from his bag. His calm demeanor irritated Oliver. He was used to being the center of attention, and this man didn't seem interested in him at all. Oliver frowned. Who does this guy think he is? He wondered. I'm offering him a chance to talk to someone like me, and he's just sitting there, reading a book? Oliver decided to push harder. He couldn't resist testing his seatmate. "You know," he started, speaking louder so nearby passengers could hear, Sports are full of overrated legends. Take Michael Jordan, for example. The man turned a page in his book but didn't look up. "Jordan's good, sure," Oliver continued, "but people act like he's some kind of god. Let's be honest, without Scottie Pippen and the rest of the Bulls, he wouldn't have won a single championship." The man finally looked up, his face still partly hidden under the brim of his cap. His eyes were calm, steady, and sharp. "Is that what you think?" he asked quietly. Oliver grinned, mistaking the question as an invitation to continue. "Absolutely," he said. "Jordan got lucky. Right team, right coach, right time. He's just a guy who capitalized on a good situation. People like me, we're the ones making real moves, managing the future of the sport." The man tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Everyone's entitled to their opinion," he said, his voice calm and even. Oliver leaned back in his seat, feeling triumphant. He believed he had put the man in his place. Probably some retired benchwarmer trying to live off his glory days, he thought. Hours passed, and the cabin grew quiet as most passengers settled in for the long flight. The man beside Oliver remained, calm, either reading his book or sipping his water. Oliver, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about him. Something about the man nagged at him. He couldn't figure it out, but there was something familiar in the way the man carried himself. Then it happened. A flight attendant approached their row, her posture straighter and her tone more respectful than before. "Mr. Jordan," she said softly, "the captain wanted me to let you know that your connection is all set when we land. Everything will be ready for you." Oliver froze. His mind raced as her words sank in. "Mr. Jordan?" His eyes widened as he turned to look at the man beside him. Slowly, the man lowered his book, meeting Oliver's gaze directly. It was Michael Jordan, the six-time NBA champion, the greatest basketball player of all time. Oliver's heart sank as he replayed everything he had said during the flight. Every insult, every dismissive comment about Jordan's legacy, it all came rushing back like a punch to the gut. For the first time in a long while, Oliver was completely speechless. Oliver's face burned with embarrassment as he sat, frozen in his seat. His hands gripped the armrests and his mind raced, replaying every word he'd said about Michael Jordan. He heard everything, Oliver thought. Every insult, every stupid remark. He wanted to melt into his seat and disappear. Michael Jordan, on the other hand, seemed completely unfazed. He turned back to his book, casually flipping a page as if nothing had happened. But Oliver couldn't stop glancing at him. The man he'd spent the past several hours belittling wasn't just a basketball player. He was a global icon, a living legend. I didn't realize," Oliver stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. Jordan didn't look up. "Realize what?" he asked, his tone calm and measured. "That I didn't know. I was sitting next to you," Oliver said, his words tumbling out awkwardly. Jordan's lips curved into a faint smile, but he kept his eyes on his book. "Does it matter who you were sitting next to?" he asked. "The things you said, they don't change based on who's listening." Oliver's chest tightened. He didn't know how to respond. He had built his entire persona on confidence, on being the smartest guy in the room. But now, he felt like a fool. His words, which once felt so clever and biting, now seemed small and petty. "I didn't mean it like that," Oliver said weakly. "I was just talking." Jordan closed his book gently and set it on the tray table. His gaze shifted to Oliver, and for the first time, Oliver felt the full weight of his presence. Jordan didn't look angry or annoyed, just steady, calm, and impossibly sure of himself. "You were just talking," Jordan repeated, his voice soft but firm. "You said I was lucky, that I was only great because of the people around me." Oliver swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to disrespect you," he said quickly. I didn't think about what I was saying." Jordan leaned back in his seat, his eyes still fixed on Oliver. "That's the thing, isn't it? A lot of people talk without thinking. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines, but it's a lot harder to step onto the court and prove yourself." Oliver nodded, his throat tight. He felt like a child being scolded by a teacher, but Jordan's tone wasn't harsh. It was thoughtful, almost kind. The silence between them stretched out, broken only by the soft hum of the plane's engines. Oliver's mind churned with regret. He had spent hours trying to prove his superiority, but now he realized how small his achievements seemed compared to the man beside him. "I'm sorry," Oliver said finally, his voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to disrespect everything you've done." Jordan studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Apology accepted," he said simply. Relief washed over Oliver, but it was quickly followed by a wave of shame. He wanted to explain himself, to make Jordan understand that he wasn't always so arrogant, but the words wouldn't come. All he could do was sit there, replaying his mistakes in his head. The hours dragged on, and Oliver couldn't stop thinking about the man beside him. He thought about Jordan's career, the championships, the iconic moments, the countless hours of work it must have taken to achieve that level of greatness. He realized how much he had underestimated the effort it took to become the best. Jordan, meanwhile, seemed completely at ease. He sipped his water, glanced through his book, and occasionally looked out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. His calmness only deepened Oliver's sense of inadequacy. Eventually, Oliver couldn't take the silence anymore. He leaned slightly toward Jordan, his voice hesitant. "Can I ask you something?" Jordan glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. "Sure." "How did you handle it?" Oliver asked. "All the criticism, the pressure, the expectations. How did you deal with all of it?" Jordan's expression softened, and he leaned back in his seat, thinking for a moment before answering. "You don't let it control you," he said. "People are always going to talk. Some will build you up, and others will try to tear you down. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what you believe about yourself and the work you're willing to put in." Oliver nodded, absorbing the words. "But it must have been hard," he said. "Having everyone watching, you, waiting for you to fail." Jordan's gaze grew more intense. "Of course it was hard," he said, "but that's what separates those who succeed from those who don't. You can't let fear or criticism stop you. You have to use it. Turn it into fuel." Oliver sat back, stunned by the simplicity and power of Jordan's words. For the first time in a long time, he felt genuinely humbled. His flashy accomplishments, his constant need for validation, it all seemed so shallow in comparison. As the plane began its descent into Tokyo, Oliver turned to Jordan one last time. "Thank you," he said quietly. Jordan looked at him, a small smile on his face. "For what?" "For this," Oliver said, gesturing around them. "For teaching me something I didn't even know I needed to learn." Jordan chuckled softly. "Good luck, Oliver," he said. "I hope you use it well." As they landed and the plane taxied to the gate, Oliver felt a strange sense of clarity. He watched Jordan step off the plane, surrounded by quiet admiration from the flight crew and passengers. For the first time in years, Oliver felt small, but not in a bad way. He felt like he had been given a second chance to be better, to think bigger, and to stop letting his ego get in the way of real growth. By the time Oliver walked through the terminal, he had made a decision. He wouldn't go back to being the man he was when he boarded that plane. He wanted to change, to grow, and to leave behind the arrogance that had defined him for so long. And as he stepped into the bustling airport, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the lesson, for the humility, and for the man who had taught him how to truly rise above. As Oliver walked through the bright, busy terminal of Tokyo Narita Airport, he couldn't shake the weight of the encounter. Every sound, the rumble of rolling suitcases, the murmured conversations, the distant announcements, felt distant, like background noise to his thoughts. He had boarded that flight feeling invincible, a man who believed he had all the answers. But now, he was leaving with more questions than he'd ever had before. Questions about himself, about success, and about what truly mattered. Oliver paused by a large window overlooking the runway. Outside, planes taxied, their engines roaring as they prepared for takeoff. He stared at them, lost in thought. It's easy to talk big when you're not the one on the field, he thought. But what about stepping up? What about actually making a difference, like Jordan said? For years, Oliver had focused on winning, on being seen as the smartest, the most successful, the best. But sitting next to Michael Jordan had shown him that greatness wasn't about loud proclamations or flashy achievements. It was about resilience, focus, and using criticism as a stepping stone instead of a stumbling block. As he continued through the terminal, Oliver noticed a small group of people gathered near the exit. It didn't take long to realize they were waiting for Michael Jordan. Even in a foreign airport, even after all these years, Jordan's presence still inspired awe. Oliver watched as Jordan greeted the group with a quiet grace, his calm demeanor unchanged. He gave a few nods, a couple of autographs, and a warm smile before disappearing into a waiting car. It was effortless, yet it left an impact. Oliver shook his head, a mix of amazement and self-reflection washing over him. That's what true greatness looks like, he thought. Not just being the best, but making people believe in something bigger. As Oliver stepped into his taxi, he pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen, hesitating. His usual instinct was to craft a post bragging about his trip, about the people he'd met. But this time, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he opened a blank note and began typing something different. A reminder to himself. Humility isn't weakness, it's strength. Greatness isn't loud, it's steady. Don't just aim to win, aim to matter. He saved the note, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about likes, shares, or how people would react. This was just for him, a quiet commitment to be better. As the taxi merged onto the bustling streets of Tokyo, Oliver leaned back, watching the city lights blur past the window. He felt different, lighter somehow. The lesson from that flight would stay with him, he knew. And while he couldn't erase the mistakes he'd made in the past, he could control what he did moving forward. He couldn't help but feel grateful for the flight, for the chance encounter, and for the man who had unknowingly changed his perspective forever. Michael Jordan didn't just teach Oliver about greatness, he showed him that it wasn't too late to aim higher, not just for success, but for significance. Thanks for watching this story of humility and self-discovery. What do you think Oliver will do next? Will he truly change his ways? Click on the screen to watch another story of life-changing moments and unexpected lessons. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.